Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the worsening COVID situation in England in particular, but how Brexit is being timed to hit at the worst possible moment out of sheer political bloody-mindedness, as far as I can tell. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, timing, it has to be said, is not Boris Johnson's strong point. Before the COVID emergency, it was already noted that leaving the EU's customs union and single market, it wasn't good at any time of year, but there were certain times of year it was particularly not ideal, like right at the start of the year. That's not a good time. Later this year, when more sensible governments were wanting to put their focus on dealing with the raging pandemic, Boris Johnson insisted that Brexit negotiations would still have the full focus of his government and the civil service. We refused the offer of a 2-year extension to allow us to concentrate on dealing with the pandemic. I mean, we can consider this in isolation. Other countries wanted their government's focus to be on the health and economic management of COVID. We did not adopt that approach. I mean, obviously we're so great that we can handle Brexit and COVID at the same time, can't we? The end result of comparable nations, we have done by far the worst in terms of both health and economics. People keep talking about COVID responses as if it's a case of, well, if you prioritise health higher, you prioritise the economy lower, or vice versa, as if it's this balance. Absolute rubbish. We stunk on both the health front and the economic front. And there are countries that did very well on the health front, and do you know what? Didn't really take that much of a hit on the economic front. Most of these countries you have to find outside of Europe, it has to be said. And we're still doing it. Our second COVID wave has been mismanaged as badly as our first. Only this time, in dealing with it, when the government try and deal with it, albeit lately, the public aren't on board as much. They've lost a lot of trust. Part of that is, of course, down to the Dominic Cummings type situations where the government allowed people close to them to get away with clear rule breaking by saying that's not rule breaking. But also just partly fatigue with the whole thing. You've got to bear in mind, we can talk about the fact that in England we had a lockdown end of March, covered April, just ended towards May. But for quite a lot of the country, they've been in lockdowns and tight restrictions for months. Months. Because, of course, when we came out of national lockdown in the north of England, the rate was still rising. So quite a lot of the north of England, they're looking at this lockdown that's coming next week and thinking, well, that's not long. We've been, I mean, it's harsher than they've been in the past few months, but they've been in some sort of measures for months. And the situation has only got worse. How are they supposed to engage with it? Because they thought, well, everything the government does actually just makes it worse. The national lockdown didn't help them because we were brought out of it when they were still rising. The interim period hasn't helped, it's just got worse. Who's to say that this will not make it worse? So sod it, sod the rules. You know, and then you think, so okay, so what does all this have to do with Brexit? Well, not only is Boris Johnson and his government splitting their limited attention between two incredibly, genuinely complex and destructive threats to the nation, but the peak impact of our current COVID wave is set to bite at exactly the time that we exit the transition period. And that, surely, is going to be the most chaotic time. So the harshest biting point of Brexit is surely going to be as we exit the transition period, with or without a deal. The worst impact of Brexit is going to hit with the worst impact of COVID. I mean, I don't know how it's possible to be this insanely reckless. This chart, which is produced by the government scientific advisors, it was shown in the announcement yesterday, and it was shown a couple of days ago, in fact, shows different models for the rise in COVID deaths. Some show a much worse outlook than others. There's different models, which means they're using different parameters just to test the water. What's important is that they all show a peak occurring, not all at the same time, but all around about December, January time, the very time that we're leaving the EU's customs union. And although we don't yet know if we will have a free trade agreement or not, we do know that we won't have frictionless trade. The government's own report on miles-long queues of lorries, days of delays in getting goods across the border, all of that stuff still happens even if we get a deal. Even if we get a full free trade agreement, that still happens. Because that's got nothing to do with tariffs, that's got to do with how easily can you get across the border. And those delays, of course, in terms of how that impacts us, that represents food and medicines not getting into the country in time. It represents price increases for food and medicines that we do manage to obtain. At a time when the pandemic is at its worst, is when we cut Britain adrift from frictionless trade with our largest trading partners, upon whom we depend for massive amounts of food and medicines. And why is this happening? It's happening because of two things that Boris Johnson has done. One, failed to follow the expert scientific and medical advice in dealing with the pandemic, as well as failing to learn the lessons of countries whose mistakes and triumphs led the way before it became an emergency in our land. If we'd have looked at the Asian countries, for example, the East Asian countries, who've not gone into lockdown, they've got more populous countries, and they haven't gone into lockdown, they've changed their behaviour, and they've got a nearly normal way of life now. They've had to change some habits, but they get to do the same things now. No, we didn't learn from that. Second, he pushed ahead with a hard Brexit without any delay to take account of the pandemic that was made much, much worse by his actions. And both of these things were done, really crucially, against the wishes of the country. It must be remembered that although Boris Johnson won a majority of parliamentary seats, I need to keep reminding people, he did not win a majority of votes. We have a first past the post system here. Over 50% of the votes, significantly over 50% of the votes, went to parties that campaigned to not leave the EU at all without another referendum for which Remain would be an option. In addition, those who campaigned for any form of Brexit, as Labour did, still insisted that it should be one with a close relationship with the EU, with high standards of rights and environmental protections baked in. This Brexit, this one we're getting right here, was voted for by a minority. Even when you lump in the votes of the Brexit Party and UKIP, it's a minority. In addition, polling has the country at odds with the government's response to COVID at almost every turn. People were initially supportive of the government, but as it became clear that they weren't following the scientific advice and instead just wasting billions on a failure to provide adequate PPE, testing, tracing, income support, the public have been more and more at odds with this government. People, for example, in terms of this lockdown, were in favour of this weeks ago. As soon as it was announced that that was the scientific advice, the public were largely on board with it. Crucially, of course, for Boris Johnson, because he doesn't care about the larger population. Conservative supporters, not so much. And that has been the difference. The latest polling from Ipsos Mori, one of the two polling companies that actually proves itself when election results are announced, I always say this, you can look at polls, there's only two polling companies that ever get accurate results when it comes to general elections. They have just revealed a massive swing from the Conservatives to Labour now, which puts Labour significantly ahead for the first time this year. And of course it can go up and down, swings and roundabouts, but it does show that recent policy decisions of the Conservative government have been deeply unpopular in the country. Labour haven't even set out what they do in government yet. Not even set that out, and they're not going to until it's campaign time, or at least they should not do. This represents people being so unhappy with the government that they'll take a chance on the unknown. Better the devil they don't know, they're thinking now. And the situation is only going to get worse. I mean, I've been worried that politically the government have insisted on this transition period ending at the end of this year, specifically because they want to hide the consequences of Brexit behind COVID. But it might not actually matter. As more and more of the public realise that our failure to manage COVID is more down to the government than the virus, what will it matter if problems with trade or jobs or food is down to COVID or Brexit in the public perception? If people start to see that it's down to government mishandling of both COVID and Brexit, then the Conservatives are still going to get their political comeuppance at the next election. I mean, that's still years away. I did see someone pointing out that America can get rid of Trump in a few days. It's got the opportunity to get rid of Trump. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I'm still worried about that. But they have a chance to. They have that opportunity. But this person also said, but we're stuck with Boris Johnson for 4 more years. No, we're not. But we are stuck with his legacy, and we are stuck with the party that enabled him. You know, they'll change their leader, but the government will still effectively be the same. The same one that took power in 2010 and shafted those most in need of state support, who shafted the economy, who shafted our health service. The same one that enabled and enriched the most worthless in society and the least in need of help. The same one that gutted our NHS whilst officially acknowledging that a viral pandemic was the #1 threat to the nation. Doesn't matter who's leading them, it's the same government, and we need more people to see this. And it might well be that although Boris Johnson made a public speech at the party conference describing the COVID pandemic as an opportunity for his party, it might well be that he's simply failing to realise that what he's playing with is Pandora's box. He's already timed our second national lockdown to be right at the end of half term, which in itself is a special sort of stupid. But he's also timed it to start just at the point at which he was wanting to take income support away. Now, they have announced that they're going to extend furlough, but they said with some differences. Those differences, I do not believe, are going to be in the favour of workers. He's also proposing that we time our exit from the EU customs union at the same time as the second, far more deadly COVID wave peaks. So just at the time when our rate of COVID deaths is set to be highest in the second wave, is the time when he wants to create shortages of food and medicines. Does it really matter if people see Brexit or COVID behind those things? As long as they see the Conservatives behind it, we can at least look forward to the beginning of the end of them, at least in this form. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.